to be something for everybody. Tonight, we're very happy to have with us Dr. John Poothullil and Eat, Chew, Live, 4 revolutionary ideas to prevent diabetes, lose weight, and enjoy food. Dr. Poothullil practiced medicine as a pediatrician and allergist for more than 30 years, with 27 of those years in the state of Texas. He received his medical degree from the University of Kerala, India in 1968, after which he did 2 years of medical residency in Washington, D.C. and Phoenix, Arizona, and 2 years of fellowship, one in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and the other in Ontario, Canada. He began his practice in 1974. He retired in 2008. He holds certificates from the American Board of Pediatrics, the American Board of Allergy and Immunology, and the Canadian Board of Pediatrics. Let's give him a great big welcome.
Thank you. Well, I thank Books and Books for organizing this event, and I thank you all for coming. Today's topic is type 2 diabetes. As you may know, it is an epidemic in 3 countries in the world right now: the United States, China, and India. So let us review what is type 2 diabetes by an example. For example, I'm going to talk about, let us call her Lisa. She was told she's a diabetic. She's 8 weeks pregnant, never had diabetes before, no family history of diabetes. Her doctor told her 3 cell types in her body out of 220 have become resistant to insulin. Okay, 3 out of 220. And these are muscle cells, the liver cells, and fat cells. Those 3 have become resistant. Why or how and why all of them at the same time? Who is coordinating it? We don't know. She was not told. She was just told all 3 are resistant. Okay. So if you take the muscle fibers, there's 250 million of them. There is 240 billion, that's 9 zeros, of liver cells, and 50 billion muscle cells, fat cells. So enough number of them have to become resistant to insulin in a manner of 8 weeks for her blood sugar to go up. Is that mathematically possible? But that is what her doctor told her. It happened. If you think that is possible, 4 days after delivery, her blood sugar went down, it became normal. So all these cells which have been practicing insulin resistance for 8 months have to reverse everything, go back to the normal way in 4 days. How is that possible? And this is what the doctor will tell her or told her, that you are free of diabetes now. You may have diabetes in 10 years because you are more likely to develop, because of your gestational diabetes, you will develop it in about 10 years, but you are free now. The same doctor walks to the next room where Wayne is sitting. He's happy because the amputated second time his toe has been amputated because of diabetes, it healed because he didn't expect it, whether it will heal or not. He was told because of his diabetes, healing may be a problem. But he's happy that it's healed. So the same doctor comes to Wayne and said, Wayne, I'm glad it is healed. Remember what I told you. Diabetes is a progressive disease. Now, for a minute you can think, on the one hand, Lisa got rid of it. On the other hand, he's saying it's a progressive disease. How can these two go together? If it's a progressive disease, how did Lisa lose it? But the doctor has no explanation. And Wayne is not concerned about explanation. He is frustrated and is fearful. He is frustrated because he has had diabetes for 20 years. And the previous 12 years, he has been taking insulin. After his first toe removal, because of diabetes, he was more diligent. And he was allowed to adjust his insulin dosage on his own. And at that time, he was taking 120 units of insulin, 60 long-acting and 60 short-acting at different times a day. And he kept his A1C down below 7 very religiously because he himself was a scientist. He had a PhD. He knew what science is. He did not understand his disease because nobody told him why he was insulin resistant or what is the mechanism. But so he kept his A1C down below 7 religiously, and yet he had his toe amputated. So he was frustrated. His biggest frustration was, you see, because he was a scientist, he understood if you have an infection and if you have a germ that is resistant to an antibiotic, your doctor does not give you the same antibiotic, it will give you something else. If you have cancer, and if your cancer cells become resistant to the chemotherapeutic agent, the doctor uses a different one. But here the doctor is saying, you are resistant to insulin, we are going to give you more insulin. How does it work? He doesn't know. He wants to know the reason. Or how does it work? He is a scientist himself, but he is frustrated because he cannot get answers. More than that, he is now fearful because he kept his A1C down, still he lost his second toe. And he is fearful because his sister went blind because of diabetes. He enjoys playing bridge too much to go blind. He does not want that. He is fearful because his friend lost his kidney because of diabetes, even though he was on insulin. He is fearful because he knows people who got heart attacks and strokes, even when their hemoglobin A1C was, quote unquote, under control. But his worst fear is that he may develop Alzheimer's. Because he's a scientist, he wants to be in control, and he cannot think of not having that control of his own life. And there are 20 million people out there in this country alone with diabetes having the same frustrations and same fears. And 90 million people diagnosed pre-diabetes who will be diabetic within the next few years. All over the world, there are 400 million people right now diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, and that's going to be 600 million in about 25 more years. So it's a worldwide problem. As he said during the introduction, I was practicing in the state of Texas. I practiced for 30 years. I was practicing primarily allergy and immunology, asthma. And I started seeing patients who are diabetics, who had diabetes, who were well controlled, but having the same complications: leg amputations, kidney failures, heart failures, stroke. So I started asking, why is this happening? What is the reason? And the thing that struck me the most was the concept of insulin resistance has never been validated. In order to validate any scientific concept, you need to know the mechanism. To validate it objectively, you need to be able to measure it reliably and repeatedly. If you ask any doctor, what is the mechanism of insulin resistance in any one of these three sites, they wouldn't know. You see, each cell is an independent living unit. So billions of cells have to reprogram themselves without any external help for a person to become insulin resistant. At the muscle side, the reprogramming has to be to prevent glucose from getting in. At the liver side, the liver cell has to push more glucose out. It's exactly the opposite. At the fat cell, it is not even about glucose. It is releasing more fatty acids. How do they know that's what they are supposed to be doing? And have you ever heard of anybody measuring the degree of insulin resistance with anybody who is a diabetic? Why? Because there is no such test. Why? My answer is there is no such thing. So now you can ask me, if there is no insulin resistance, why is there diabetes? What's the reason for it? Okay? I'll give you my explanation. Whether you like it or not, that's up to you. You can challenge me, or if you have a better explanation, give it to me. Let us start with insulin. No, that is the primary focus. What is insulin? Insulin is a hormone released from your pancreas in response to elevation of blood sugar. Insulin does not enter any cell. All insulin does is ring the bell to let the cell know there is glucose outside. Why? Because glucose itself cannot ring the bell. There is no receptor for glucose outside a cell. But insulin can ring the bell. Then the cell has to send a transporter to the cell wall, create an opening, load up glucose, and bring it in. So if the cell does not move the transporter to the cell wall, no glucose can get in. So this is how insulin works. So if there is insulin resistance, you should be able to measure or explain what is the step. And nowadays, a scientist in the laboratory can count the number of proteins produced by a single cell. With nanotechnology, that is possible. So if somebody wants to know what is the mechanism of insulin resistance, it can be done. So the question is, why are they not doing it? The biggest use of glucose in the body is your muscle cells, muscle fibers. They use it to produce energy. But the muscle fiber is like a hybrid, the engine of a hybrid car. The engine of a hybrid car can produce energy either from gasoline or electricity. And you won't feel a difference. The engine keeps running. The muscle fiber can produce energy from glucose or fatty acid. When you haven't had anything to eat all day, or a lady who is pregnant and in the first trimester vomiting, could not eat anything the whole day, or you don't feel well, or you didn't get to have any food, you can still work. Your muscles still function. Why? Because muscles are using fatty acid to produce energy. So for the muscle, it doesn't care whether energy comes from fatty acid or glucose. So if the muscle is producing enough energy and there is enough fatty acid inside, why should it send a glucose transporter to bring glucose in, even if insulin is knocking the door, ringing the bell? Why should it? And then the endocrinology will say, yeah, that's the evidence. It's resistant to insulin. But what they don't say anything, the muscle is still working. It is still producing energy. Most of the time, the diagnosis is incidental. It's not because you're weak or muscles don't function or liver is not functioning. It is just you had a routine blood test, your blood sugar is up, you're diabetic, and you're insulin resistant. 3 sites are not working properly. But the fact is they are working properly. So then the question here is, where is the fatty acids coming from? According to the insulin resistance theory, the fat cell is releasing more fatty acid. What I'm suggesting is, it is not because the fat cells are releasing fatty acid. The fatty acid level in the blood is high because the fat cells cannot accommodate more fatty acids. Why? Because the fat cells are full of fat, means triglyceride. 3 molecules of fatty acid, 1 molecule of glycerol is called triglyceride. That is the fat that we store. So here is the key. Most people say, oh, I have inherited a gene. The gene you have inherited determines your fat storage capacity. Some people may have the capacity to store only 10 pounds of fat, whereas others can have 300 or 400, based on one of their parents being heavy or lean. So if we have inherited a capacity of 10 pounds, and if you gain 15 pounds, that last 5 pounds will stay in the blood as fatty acids. Because your liver can store only 120 grams of glucose as glycogen. The rest will be converted into fatty acid. The liver converts everything into fat that the body does not use immediately between the 2 meals, because our long-term storage is as fat, triglyceride. So if the fat cells are full, regardless of whether you are pregnant or not, lean or not, old or not, whether you weigh 200 pounds or 500 pounds, if your fat cells are full, the fatty acids are going to stay in the blood. When the fatty acid level goes up, your muscles will switch to fatty acid to produce energy. When the muscles switch to fatty acid to produce energy, the glucose stays in the blood. So the only measurement we have is blood glucose level. When it goes up, you are termed a diabetic. And what do they give you? Insulin. You are resistant to insulin, but they give you the same thing. And how many people, once they start insulin, get off it? Can you make a guess? What percentage of people get off? 5%. 5%. Why? What does insulin do? What does any medication do? The first medication they give you is insulin sensitizer. And your blood sugar does go down. If you take a shot of insulin, your blood sugar will go down. Where does it go? I asked a doctor 3 days ago, and he said, it goes through my kidney. It goes out. I said, no. Have you ever measured your urine? No. I'm sorry? Which cell? The cell that is resistant to insulin or the cell that remains sensitive to insulin? Then that's the point. If the cell is already sensitive, why do you have to give it another medication to get more sensitive? See, these are the things. If we have a test, if you know the mechanism, then you can say, okay, you give the medication, then you can count the protein, the glucose transporters, which cell is moving it, which cell is taking it in. You will know exactly what target. Then you can decide your treatment based on what cell is moving, taking in. That's not happening. All they know is the blood sugar goes down. Yes, medication is working. The truth of the matter is, if your blood sugar went down, the organ that is most sensitive to insulin is the liver. The liver will convert more of that glucose into fat. Ask anybody who is taking diabetic medications or insulin. They get heavier and heavier. And what do the doctors do? Increase the dose of insulin or the medication. Right? And how is that going to help you? And it is the fat that can clog up your arteries. You can put oil in your hand, you cannot wash it off with water. Right? Blood is a water-based solution. So the more fat you create, the more chances of that sticking into in the inside of the blood vessels. And let me give you this side story. People who have kidneys removed because of diabetic complications and new kidneys put in, kidney transplant patients, they have to be on immunosuppressants to prevent rejection. And many of them will develop cancer because of immunosuppression, except people who are diabetics. When they get kidney transplant, they don't develop cancer, or the incidence of cancer is less. Why? Because in order to take cancer, it takes 10, 15 years. These people die of heart attacks and vascular complications before that. Because they become more diligent in keeping their blood sugar down. They don't want to go through another kidney. So they take more medication, produce more fat. For the complications. The culprit is, of course, why did the sugar happen? So I'm just trying to say the groundwork of where I am coming from. So once you realize this is, now the question is, what is the raw material the liver is using to produce fat? Okay? If you don't put something in your mouth, that will be absorbed into the blood as glucose. Why do you need the medication? On the one hand, you're putting it in the mouth, then you're taking a medication to drive it out of blood, not out of the body, just out of the blood. And what you're measuring is what is floating in the blood. And you're happy. Oh, doctor is happy. Your A1C is down. You have seen those guys dancing around in the commercials, right? What they don't realize is what has happened to that glucose. Where did that go? So now I'm going to tell you the rest of my story about if you take our average diet now, more than 50% of the energy comes from grains. We have grains, morning, breakfast, lunch, dinner, snack, all are grains. Each molecule of complex carbohydrate from a grain, you know how many molecules of glucose is in one molecule of complex carbohydrate? 200,000. So when you eat a handful of rice, you're actually eating pure glucose, pure sugar. How many people will eat rice just raw like that? Boiled rice. Nobody will eat. What you are enjoying is what you mix with it. So in order to enjoy what you mix with it, you are taking in the pure sugar. When you take the dough to make a pizza base, you are actually rolling a thick layer of glucose or sugar. When you take 2 pieces of bread to make a sandwich, it is sugar made into a sculpture or made firm.
Regardless of whether it's whole wheat.
That's a very good question. If you take 100 grams of whole wheat, it will have 77 grams of complex carbohydrate. If it is refined, it will have 80. 77 versus 80.
So it's better than white, but still not great.
I mean, that 3% is, if you consider it's better, good for you. It makes no sense to me, whether refined, because they say the fiber will offset the 3%. No, it does not. They have not even demonstrated there is enough fiber in the bran to make a difference. If I give you a bowl of sugar with bran on top of it, will you eat it? That is what you are eating, essentially, whole grain or brown rice. In fact, one doctor even published a book. Just eat brown rice, your diabetes will disappear. That's what he said. So whether the flour is made from wheat or rice or corn, it does not matter. It's the same thing. You are eating pure glucose. And that is absorbed into the body. The liver has to deal with it. 120 grams is kept. The rest goes into fat. Fat cells are filled up. Fatty acids stay in the blood. You use it for energy. Glucose stays there. You are a diabetic. You are taking a medication. Yes, your blood sugar is down, but you get fatter and fatter, and you go to all the complications. So now you can ask me, what is the evidence? Is there any evidence for what I'm saying? I can give you two examples. Native Americans, before they were transferred into reservations, diabetes was unheard of. One doctor actually looked when they came to the reservation how many people had type 2 diabetes. He couldn't find any, hardly any. But within 2 generations, type 2 diabetes started showing up, and now 50% of them have type 2 diabetes. This 50%. The same with the Inuits in Alaska. The same with the Aborigines in Australia. Why? Because in their native habitat, they move from one food source to another. They never cultivated any grain. I'll come to that in a minute. Let me finish the story. One doctor in 1970, one Australian researcher, asked 10 Aborigines, 5 males and 5 females, all with diabetes on medications. Can you go back and live in the bush just like their forefathers did? And they agreed. They went, they stayed, they ate what nature provided. In 8 weeks, they lost weight, their diabetes disappeared, they did not need any more medications. Why? In the bush, they don't cultivate grains. In my opinion, grains were never meant for humans. Otherwise, we would have had beaks to take off the chaff of rice. The agriculture, mechanized agriculture, refining and milling made it possible for cheap grains and grain flour to be available for everybody. And this is the commonality between United States, China, and India. Grains in India, the government subsidizes grain for the poor people. In the United States, with the food stamps, what can they buy? The cheapest food that can fill up the stomach. Bread and wheat products, wheat flour products. That's why the poor people have more type 2 diabetes in this country and wherever food is subsidized. So the commonality is grains. The grains have, as I said, anywhere from 70 to 80% complex carbohydrate. Quinoa has 45%. So it is less. Then it depends on, well, it is quinoa, you can eat. And if you eat more of it, there's the same problem. It does not matter where what the source is. It is whether you are taking in more than 125 grams of what that liver can hold. Everything else will be converted into fat. The liver can produce fat from fatty acid that comes from the fat you eat, or amino acid from excess protein the body cannot use, or glucose. It so happens our diet ordinarily contains more glucose in the form of carbohydrate than anything else. In other words, it is not the fat that you consume in the modern day American diet that is dangerous. It's the fat that you produce in your liver from the carbohydrate that you consume. That is the problem. Yes. Say that again. Are they? Legumes. Are the legumes included in the classification of carbohydrate? As I said, carbohydrate from any source is carbohydrate. Whether it comes from a fruit or legumes or potatoes, or it doesn't matter. The total quantity. Right? It is eating more carbohydrate than your body needs between the two meals. As it stands now, our present day diet, we have more than 50% of the energy is coming from complex carbohydrate from grains. So that's the number one most obvious. How many people who consume legume but no grain products will have problem? Very few, almost nil. If you look at the Native American diet, 50% of their energy came from fat. Okay? The rest can be divided between protein and carbohydrate. And the carbohydrate source was not grains, but all. So it varies from day to day. So you cannot say this particular food is bad. Even grains are fine if you are not eating as much or if you don't eat anything else. So I cannot put a finger on and say, okay, this is what is causing diabetes or not. Right. 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 Just a second. I was just talking to somebody in the restaurant. He comes from Cuba, and he said diabetes is so bad now. In India, the state of Kerala claims they are the diabetes capital of the world. I'm sorry? They had some, but now because they can afford more, there's a middle class. They get more money, and the most important entertainment is eating. In about 1980, India had 20 million diabetics. Now it is 60. China had about 25, 30. Now it is almost 80 to 100. In all over the world, there is 400. It is, well, the excess comes from grains. Yes. I did not understand your first part of it. All right. Mm-hmm.
But you don't eat that all your life until you get up in age, like your 50s, and then all of a sudden you diagnose you're at the borderline of being diabetic or, you know.
If I understand you correctly, what you're saying, you have been eating it all your life, but you never had any problem. Sometimes, right. Right. The type 2 diabetes was originally called adult onset diabetes. And it was commonly seen after somebody reached age 60. I have seen in my clinic a girl age 12 with type 2 diabetes. Now it is common. So that age thing is out of the picture. What I am suggesting is how fast do you fill up your fat cells? It doesn't matter what age you are. Earlier, before he came in, I talked about a young lady who never had diabetes before or no family history of diabetes, at 8 weeks pregnant, became diabetic. Why? She was encouraged to eat for 2 people and she ate and she ate. And if anybody says this is good for the baby's brain, she ate. This is good for the baby's complexion, she ate. And she filled up her fat cells faster than anybody else. And she became diabetic. And 4 days after delivery, her diabetes disappeared. Why? Because she lost the weight. Right. Is it type 1 or type 2? Usually at 8, it may be type 1. Yeah, that's a difference. Type 1 is different. But what you're saying is correct, that we are eating. See, then the question is, what should we eat and how much? I'm not asking you to eat any particular type of meal, because if you look at all over the world, people are living based on what they produce locally. So there is no one type of diet. It is what is available. In my book, I say the top line is how you eat matters more than what you eat. Okay? There are 2 things to consider. If you look at all the foods nature has provided for us, for adult humans, tell me how many foods can you eat without chewing? What is natural, what nature produces for adult humans, unless you consider honey as an. Nowadays, look at all the food that you're going to do every day. The shakes, the pureed foods, the blended foods, the soft grain, the breads. How much chewing do you do? Yeah. If it is in the mouth, and if you don't have to chew, what do? You swallow. You are concentrating on the next bite. And how much of that, first of all, the question is, why do you eat if you don't enjoy it? Once you swallow it, you cannot enjoy it. So, that I have asked the question to each person, and how much of that food did you enjoy? Oh, I enjoy 100%. Okay. What's the mechanism of enjoyment? If you put taste buds and smell receptors, if you put 1 potato chip on your tongue, you can taste that. If you put 10, which one do you taste? And the one on the bottom. So what's... Well, that exactly is the problem. And okay, right. Let's go back on that. The best example of what you should eat or how you should eat, look at toddlers, anywhere from 2 years to 6 years. I think we all have been there one time. If you take a toddler, you'll notice 3 things. 1, They will not eat unless they are hungry. Second, if you give them 5, 6 different types of food, they will choose what they want to eat. Third, once they are satisfied, they could care less what is left on the plate. They will go out and play. For adults, once you put on the plate, when I was counseling 10 older, heavy, overweight people in Texas while I was practicing. And I told them, I grew up in India, and some days I didn't eat and I didn't feel hungry. Now I know why. I said, why? Because you were eating for me. There are starving children in India, right? You have to finish what is on your plate. So once you put on the plate, you eat. Why? Because instead of enjoying the food and stopping when the enjoyment went down, we have changed that to fullness of the stomach. And what creates the fullness of the stomach? The grain-based foods, because they can absorb water. Rice fills up. And you wait for that feeling of fullness to stop eating. If you are thirsty, if I bring 12 ounces of water, how much will it take for you to quench your thirst right now? You said not much. That means you don't know. How long will it take for you to drink it? Less than a minute. By the time you finish drinking, your thirst is quenched. Did you drink enough to fill up your stomach? You know what your stomach capacity is? 1,000 cc, 1 liter almost. It can. You just imagine the amount of food you can eat. Did you drink as much water for thirst, quenching thirst? No. Right. So what makes you stop? What's the signal? Your brain knows you had enough. But when you eat, you are looking for this. Right. There you go. Yes, exactly. You know why? No. That is when they start listening to their parents.
That's when they start joining the Clean Plate Club.
Right, exactly. You better finish it. If you finish it, I'll give you the ice cream. He said, we are traveling. We don't have time to stop. You better eat it. And of course, all the parties. And you have to eat something. It's a friend's party. And then we transport that into the school days because you don't have time to eat. You have many things to do. Then you're in the workplace. Everybody's birthday, everything we have to celebrate. And if somebody made something, you have to eat. Otherwise, it's an insult to the person. Yes. The liver can hold 125 grams. That's about 24 teaspoonfuls. Yeah, with the last count. That is what the liver will hold as carbohydrate. Everything else will go into fat. So it depends on when your blood sugar level goes down, the liver is releasing glucose. So all you have to do is to replenish what the liver is releasing. The best example will be to make it easier. Let's say you slept for 12 hours. That means your liver has depleted 12 teaspoons of glucose. Because the only organ that is active at night is your brain. It doesn't require a whole lot of energy. So that's all the carbohydrate you need. That is why if you boiled rice and try to eat it, it doesn't taste good. Why? Nature says you don't need it. Anything your body needs, you will enjoy eating it. 24 teaspoons, 8 tablespoons. In the morning, you need 3 tablespoons full of oatmeal if you want to eat oatmeal. That's all you need. Yeah. No, I cannot tell you what you need because every day, the average, it's easy to say average, but average is good for research. If every day is an average day, you don't need the term average. The very meaning of average is no 2 days are alike. So how can I tell you how much you should eat, how much you should drink? It's like telling you can breathe only so many liters of air a day. Will that make any sense? Or you should drink only this much cc or liters of water a given day. It does not make sense. Depending on what you are doing, what activity, the temperature, it changes. Your body's needs change. Your brain knows when you sit down to eat what your body is lacking. So the first question is, what is the basis for the sensation of hunger? Why do you feel hungry? And the sensation of hunger does not happen at a fixed time. Why is it variable in terms of timing? The same way with the sensation of satisfaction. It is based on different volumes of food. If I take you and we go for a buffet lunch, say 100 items, the best Chinese buffet, how many will you choose? How many items will you choose? Give me a number. Give me a number. 5, 6. And you sit down and enjoy all of it. I take you back to the same buffet in the evening. Same buffet. Will you take exactly the same 5 or 6? Why? But you enjoyed this 5 lunch. Why do you want to change? Right. The nutrients you got from your earlier meal have not been used up, but in the meantime, some other nutrients have gone low, and your brain knows which food contains those nutrients needed in the body at that time. It's also conditioning, okay? So only your brain knows. So how can somebody else tell you, this is what you should eat, this is how much you should eat, and you'll be fine? How can they do that? Yes. Mm-hmm. No, 8 tablespoons, 24 teaspoons for a whole day. That is what the liver can hold. You can eat any amount you want, but the liver will hold only 125 grams. So it depends on how much.
Let's assume I don't want to do that. I want to stick to the
125 grams.
Which is about 8 tablespoons.
Right.
Per day.
But it depends on how much is left here.
Okay, well, let's say that I'm still hungry. What can I eat?
That's a very good question. That's what we are discussing. The question is, why are you hungry?
Should I eat fat?
No. I cannot tell you what you need. Only your brain knows. You look at the food, and the brain will tell you, this looks appealing. Sometimes you can open your refrigerator, there is food there, but nothing looks appealing. But your body needs. One doctor asked me, John, I ate, but I am still hungry. Exactly the same thing, because he did not eat what his body was looking for at that time. If
Well, I guess what he's asking is, how do you know what your body's looking for?
that,
That's another way of asking.
how do the toddlers know? A toddler. Right, you had that when you were a toddler.
So how do you get it back?
Read my book. No, I have a whole section on how to get it back, because I have to. It takes too much time to explain to you. Once you understand the basics, all I'm trying to say is it is still there, stored in your brain.
So you should, you know how people say you should have to eat breakfast or you should eat at a certain time. Are you saying people should eat when they're hungry? So when you wake up and you're not hungry, you shouldn't eat?
What does breakfast means? Breaking fast. Who says you have to break fast at a particular time? 7 o'clock, you break. If your body does, that's fine.
But some people don't feel like eating. That was a big problem for me growing up. I had to do the house or something, and my aunt, because it would make me sick. I'm like, I'm not hungry right now. And then I would get to school and I didn't want to eat anything at school. And then when I get home, I'd have to have this huge meal because supposedly in their mind I had nothing to eat all day, but I was fine. Right.
Yeah.
And I pretty much eat like that too, but it's eat. And I'm not hungry, but he's starving. It's like, okay, now I have to eat because then I won't be able to eat. So it's two different things.
Yeah.
When somebody else is eating, you're eating.
I had a husband and wife. They came, and I talked to them, and the wife was determined to make her husband lose weight. 3 weeks later, they came back and said he has not lost any weight. Said, in spite of me putting on the plate what he should eat, because she was deciding. So I tried to find out, and I came to find out that on the day she is hungry, he gets more food. On the day she's not. Yeah. So how can, you go by your own signals. That's all you have to do, because we are all practiced it when we were toddlers. It is still stored there. It's a matter of reactivating it. The things you have to do is, one, don't eat unless you are hungry. Second, when you eat, you should enjoy every bite of food. The more bites you take, the more times you chew, the less you are going to eat. Because most of the time, the modern food, it does not require a whole lot of chewing. So boom, it's gone. Who cares? Good for him. If he have the time to meditate and chew, fine. It depends on the size of the bite and how much you enjoy. The key point is, when you had enough, you will see a sudden drop in the enjoyment of that food. The first bite, if you are hungry, that first bite tastes so good. As you are eating, the degree of enjoyment goes down. That's the time to stop. Just like you do when you're drinking water. They're the same. That's all you have to do. Don't eat anything that you cannot chew. And if you are diabetic or high blood sugar, don't eat grains or grain flour products. What about what? Okay, how much do you chew soup? Don't forget about it. Soup is not a natural food for adult humans, right? Soup. Are you going to be deprived? There are many people in the other parts of the world who don't even know what soup is. You can survive very well. I have been telling my wife she should make some recipes. One of these days she will make that, and I'll put it on my website. Yeah. Lentils you can cook. Almost every Indian will know. All you have to do is make friends with an Indian lady, and you will have lentil recipes. It is not the lentil that there should be. It is the number of spices they use. The spices can provide at least 25% of the nutrients that your body needs without adding any calories or anything that need to be stored. And spices add enjoyment. Why are they enjoyable? Why are they flavorful? Why? No, because they are flavorful and enjoyable in general because there is a nutrient in them that the body can use.
Can you name a few nutritious condiments?
Spices?
Spices, yeah.
See, there are at least 100 different spices. What is nutritious what is for your body depends on what is depleted at that time and whether you have another source. It doesn't matter what the source is. But through spices you can get more of them without adding any energy or calories to it, but at the same time enjoyable. You can put any label on anything you want. The whole thing boils down to what your body needs at any given time. And no diet can tell you that. Yeah, that is all the liver can store at any given time. But it is being depleted and replenished with each meal. There is no something as better or good because they are all absorbed and absorbed as glucose. The only difference if you take something fruit, sugar, it is one molecule of glucose with one molecule of fructose. If you take 1 tablespoon of mashed potato and 1 tablespoon of sugar, which one will cause elevation of blood sugar faster? The potato will cause the elevation of blood sugar faster than pure sugar. Why? The potato is purely glucose. The other one is glucose and fructose. And fructose is absorbed slower. And it is changed in the liver to glucose. So it takes more time for the blood sugar to go. Juices you should not be drinking. If you want to eat a fruit, chew it. Eat it. Yes. Most of the long distance runners and exercise, by the end of their running, 80% of their energy is produced from fatty acid, not from glucose. Glucose is more like as a kindling. It just starts the process. And our mitochondria is more efficient in extracting energy from fatty acid. And more fatty acids can get into the muscle fiber because they don't need insulin to get in, help from anything, because the wall of the cell is made of fatty acid and cholesterol. So the fatty acid can slide in easier. So the mitochondria will produce more energy from fatty acid than from glucose. So if your objective is to use more glucose to produce energy, no, that's not going to happen. It is programmed to use fatty acid more to produce energy. The organ that prefers glucose is your brain. That's why you need some.
Can you take one more question? How is the brain affected by including Alzheimer's and other memory losses, especially as people get older?
How is the brain?
Right, affected by the diet or the eat to live kind of
Well, there is an increased in.
Alzheimer's or memory just as you get older, memory
Right. No, the neurons can be affected by different things, but there is a higher incidence of Alzheimer's in people who are diabetic or high blood sugar. And they still don't know the exact mechanism. But what I'm suspecting is glucose get attached to different proteins in the body. The test A1C is one of them. The percentage of hemoglobin, which is a protein, with attached glucose. In addition to the hemoglobin, albumin, glucose get attached, or the diabetes in veterinary diabetes, they check the albumin-based glucose, not the hemoglobin-based glucose, because they can do it more often, because their lifespan, this is 3 months, they will do it every 3 weeks. Anyway, similarly, the brain proteins can latch on to glucose, and that changes the configuration of the protein. And the configuration changes, functionality changes, and memory loss. So I'm suspecting it is the glycation, it is called glycation, glucose attaching to the protein, that is responsible for the memory loss. So you need to bring the glucose level down.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Poothullil. That was a great presentation. I'll be collecting your co-pays at the front for all the diagnosis that was just given. So, actually, all the information you need is right in this book. The books are for sale behind the counter. The doctor will be sitting right here signing. For those of you watching online, give us a call. We'll get one signed. We'll ship it to you. And for all of you here, thank you so much for coming. Enjoy the rest of your evening.